the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Have a note here from, I think I could say her name. Her name is Olivia. She's out west, out in the LA area, and she says, Patrick, I listen to your show every morning on my way to dropping my kids off at school. I'm so grateful for Relevant Radio, for it has helped me to understand my Catholic faith on a whole new level. With that said, I find myself questioning every single thing I do. There's a level of guilt that's there. I'm trying to discern if this is my conscience keeping me from sinning. I can't help to always go back to thinking what everyone says about being Catholic. It's about making us feel guilty because of the so many rules. Is it normal to feel this way when coming back into the faith? Thank you again. So grateful for Relevant Radio, and please pray for me. Well, thank you so much, Olivia. We will pray for you. Please pray for us. I would approach your question this way, and here's how I'm interpreting what you said in your email, and that is that the more you know about your Catholic faith and about life issues and your relationship with God and etc., the more aware you are of ways in which perhaps you haven't been as close to God as you thought you were, or you're more aware of the ways in which maybe without realizing it before, but now you realize it, maybe things in your life were incompatible with the gospel, incompatible with following Jesus. Big things maybe, little things probably. So it's not about feeling guilty, but let's talk about guilt in a minute. I have a few thoughts about the issue of guilt. I think what's happening, just reading between the lines from your little note here, what I think is happening is that you are waking up. That has connotations I don't intend, like, you were fast asleep before. I don't mean it that way. But you're being more enlightened. You're being more aware. You're seeing things more clearly, and in some cases, you're seeing things you never saw before. I'll give you an example. This may have no connection whatsoever to your own life, but I've been told personally many times over the years by couples in which, let's say, the guy had a vasectomy, or she had her tubes tied, or they were on birth control of some sort for years and years. I've been told any number of times by couples like that, why did no one ever tell us this? How come nobody ever explained to us why contraception is seriously wrong? How come? Because everybody does it. All lay Catholics are using contraception. Now, obviously, there are some who don't, but the vast majority of Catholic folk, and at least in my own experience, once they figured it out, once they realized, wait a minute, this is wrong, and nobody told us that this was wrong, there was a sense of anxiety and even anger in some cases. How come nobody ever told us this? How come the priest in confession told us that it was okay to have a vasectomy? Well, you've got 3 kids, you've done your part, God understands, follow your conscience, and yeah, go ahead and get a vasectomy, that kind of stuff. That's false, by the way. So don't look at it, I would suggest, don't look at it so much as you have to be on edge or worried, but you now know things, and you're aware of things, and you see things that you didn't before, and so your radar is stronger. Your awareness of the path ahead of you is clearer. And maybe you never saw the steep cliff over there, or the sharp, jagged rocks over there, or the other hazards that were on your path. You never really noticed them because nobody ever really pointed them out. And now that you've been listening to Relevant Radio, thanks be to God, your awareness of the situation is clearer now, but it's clear not to make you guilty, but so that you can be safer and avoid the steep cliff and avoid the sharp, jagged rocks and avoid that rattlesnake over there under that bush. It helps you to navigate more carefully toward God, toward heaven. Now, His grace is what's drawing you. But it's important to have that sense of clarity, and the more clarity you have, the less likely it is that you'll fall into sin, even small sins. So I would look at it that way. Let's talk about guilt for a minute. What is guilt? Guilt, and it takes different forms. It could be shame, it could be embarrassment. There are different words we can use to describe it. But guilt is a good thing, everybody. Guilt is a good thing. It's good because it means your conscience is functioning properly. What good would it do you to have a smoke alarm that didn't work because the battery's dead? And because you never checked it, the battery's been dead for a long time, and you're just lucky that there hasn't been a fire, but what good does a smoke detector do you if it's dead and it can't function? It can't tell you, hey, there's smoke in the room, there's a fire here somewhere. That's what they're supposed to do, so that you can get out, get your family and your pet out, and not die in a fire. Well, your conscience is like that smoke alarm. And what we sometimes derisively refer to as guilt, or even worse, so-called Catholic guilt. Whenever I hear somebody talking about Catholic guilt, now you didn't do that, Olivia, I'm just editorializing here. I always think this person doesn't have a clue. Guilt is the way in which your conscience, which is a function of your soul, it's an operation of your soul that warns you if you are approaching danger. If you are in a situation where you're contemplating doing something that you, deep down inside, you realize, well, that's not right, I shouldn't do that. That's your conscience. Now, guilt is when you don't heed your conscience and you do something knowingly, to some extent, doesn't have to be with absolute clarity, but you're thinking, I shouldn't do this, and I'm going to do it anyway. Well, then your conscience kicks into gear in terms of guilt, because it's reminding you that what you did was wrong. Or maybe it was something you should have done that you didn't do, like go to Mass on Sunday. I don't really feel like it today. I went last week, and by golly, I'm going to go next week. But today, I'd rather sleep in, or I'd rather go do whatever. Your conscience has that twofold function. One is it warns you ahead of time. And the other is that once you've hit the rocks, it says you've hit some rocks and your ship will sink, so you better do something about it. That's what guilt is. Guilt is it's a self-defense mechanism. It's a coping mechanism, if you want to put it that way. Not in terms of making it all right again, but to warn you to take action because what you did was wrong. So anybody who experiences guilt, now there are obviously scenarios in which it's guilt that is born of somebody's misunderstanding of a sin, thinking it's a sin when it's really not. Scrupulosity comes into play. That's a difficulty that some people experience, where they feel guilty about everything, including things that have nothing to do with sin, but they magnify those things into sins when they're not really sins, and they feel guilt. That is a deviation from the norm. But the norm is that you recognize, I did a boo-boo and I need to fix that. Maybe it's a really big boo-boo, something that's life-changing. So that's what I would say to you, is just, trust in God. He loves you. He wants you to be happy. I hope that helps, Olivia. I really do. And I'll give you an analogy from my own experience. I've never talked about this on the air, that's for sure. But from the time I was a child, I don't know why or whatever, but I've been told by the ear, nose, and throat doctor from the time I was a kid that for some reason God blessed me with abundant earwax. And I would have to get my ears cleaned out every so often. I don't want to hear this. Yeah, well, too late, buddy. No, from the time I was a kid, you check in with a doctor every so many years, and it always seemed to be the ear, nose, and throat doctor who would say, your ears produce an abundance of wax. Some people, not much. Some people, a lot. You're in the a lot category. That's been my physiological reality my whole life. And so here's the analogy that I would offer to Olivia. When you get your ears cleaned out, if you're like me out there in Radioland and you have to have the earwax removed on a regular basis, you will hear sounds you never heard before since the last time you had your ears cleaned out. And you will suddenly, the clarity in those sounds, let's say in your home, or the air conditioner kicks on and you normally wouldn't notice it because you have the extra earwax. And I know it's kind of a weird thing, but I think it's a good analogy. It's not that those things weren't there before. They were there before. But now you can hear them. Now you can hear this sort of full range of sound that you were living with all along, but the earwax blocked out some of that sound. That's kind of the way sin is. It's not a sin to have earwax. But that's another way of thinking about sin and the effects of sin, is that they can, and do frequently, deaden or muffle or anesthetize, pick the analogy that you prefer, your conscience. And the very sharp, clear, loud bell that rings when you know you've done something wrong, when, figuratively speaking, you don't have a lot of earwax surrounding your conscience, you can hear it loud and clear. But people who go for years and years and years and years and years, and they never heed their conscience, it's kind of like spiritual earwax building up around your conscience, and the warnings become muffled. And for some people, which is a terrible situation to be in, for some people, it's gone on so long, they can no longer really hear their conscience. And it's like having that smoke detector, the smoke alarm in your house that's dead, dead, dead because the battery was never changed. Does you no good. So I'll leave it at that. I hope that's helpful to you.
How tired is Nancy of that excuse? Sorry, honey, I didn't hear you. My earwax problem.
Well, here's the good side, the bright side of it. I make sure that I keep it cleared out. So, can't catch me.
You're squandering a perfectly good alibi.
I know. I've tried it. Doesn't work. So anyway, so that's this one weird trick to think about your conscience. So everyone's going to say, how much earwax do I have today? Just think there's going to be a boom in business for the ear, nose, and throat doctors out there. You can join me by listening to The Patrick Madrid Show on the Relevant Radio app, live each weekday at 8 to 11 a.m. And thanks for listening.